The October rain hammered against the kitchen window of their suburban Denver home as Emily Martinez wiped down the granite countertops for the third time that evening. At 42, she had developed these small rituals, cleaning when anxious, organizing when overwhelmed. Tonight, both emotions churned in her stomach like storm clouds. David should be home by now, she murmured to herself, glancing at the clock that read 9:47 p.m. Her husband's law firm had been demanding lately, or so he claimed. The late nights had become routine over the past 6 months, each excuse more elaborate than the last. She moved to the living room, straightening throw pillows on their cream-colored sectional, the one they'd picked out together at a furniture store in Cherry Creek 5 years ago. Everything in this house held memories. The hardwood floors they'd refinished themselves during their 10th anniversary summer. The bay window where she'd sat reading countless Sunday mornings while David made his famous blueberry pancakes. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of building something together. Her phone buzzed with a text. Working late again? Don't wait up. The message felt cold. Clinical. When had David stopped signing his texts with love? When had Honey become absent from their conversations? Emily sank into the armchair, her favorite spot in the house, and pulled her laptop onto her knees. If David was working late, she might as well catch up on her own work. As a freelance graphic designer, she often found herself working odd hours to accommodate clients across different time zones. She opened her email and began scrolling through client requests when a notification popped up in the corner of her screen. David's Gmail account was logged in on their shared laptop, something they'd set up years ago for convenience when paying bills or organizing household matters. A new email had arrived in his inbox with the subject line, Financial Documentation. Confidential. Emily's finger hovered over the trackpad. She'd never been the type to snoop, had always trusted David implicitly. But something about the late nights, the distant behavior, the way he'd been so secretive with his phone lately, it all nagged at her. She clicked. The email was from someone named Marcus Chen at Chen & Associates Legal Services. The content made her blood run cold. David, as discussed, I've completed the preliminary asset review. The house situation is more complex than initially thought. We'll need to move carefully with the filing to ensure maximum benefit. Your strategy of waiting until after the anniversary date was smart. It strengthens our position significantly. Please review the attached documentation and let me know your thoughts on timeline. We should schedule another meeting this week to finalize the approach. Best regards, Marcus Chen, Eskin. Emily's hands trembled as she scrolled down to see an attachment labeled DM Divorce Strategy V3 PDF. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Divorce strategy? Her David, her partner of 15 years, was planning to divorce her? And he was doing it strategically, waiting until after their anniversary? With shaking fingers, she downloaded the attachment. The document that opened was a detailed 20-page analysis of their financial situation, complete with asset valuations, timeline recommendations, and legal strategies. It read like a battle plan, designed to leave her with as little as possible. Subject: David Martinez, Divorce Proceedings. Strategy Key Assets. Primary Residence, 2847. Maple Street, Denver, CO, ST. Value $750,000. Joint savings accounts, $127,000. David's 401k, $340,000. Emily's freelance business assets, minimal value recommended strategy, File for divorce citing irreconcilable differences. Claim primary residence as marital property subject to equal division. 3. Request spousal support be limited due to wife's income potential. Time filing for maximum strategic advantage. Emily's vision blurred as she read on. The document detailed how David planned to argue that her freelance income was underreported and that she could easily increase earnings if motivated. It suggested ways to minimize his obligation to provide support, and most devastatingly, it outlined a strategy to force the sale of their home. the home where they'd planned to grow old together. She scrolled to a section titled Potential Complications and found her name listed under Wife's Emotional Attachment to Property. The notes read, Subject shows strong emotional connection to marital home. May resist sale. Recommend emphasizing financial necessity and Emily's ability to start fresh. The clinical detachment in the language, referring to her as the subject, cut deeper than any harsh word David had ever spoken to her. Emily closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of their living room, rain still pounding against the windows. The house suddenly felt different, not like the sanctuary she'd known for over a decade, but like a battlefield where she was about to become a casualty. Her phone rang, and David's name appeared on the screen. Hey, babe. His voice sounded exactly the same as always. Warm, familiar, loving. Just wanted to let you know I'll be really late tonight. This case is killing me. Which case? Emily asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Oh, the Morrison merger. Lots of documentation. To review. The lie came so easily to him. Emily wondered how many other lies she'd accepted without question over the past months. Okay, she said. I'll see you in the morning. Love you, David said, the words that once brought her comfort now feeling like weapons. Love you too, she replied automatically, though the words tasted bitter. After ending the call, Emily sat in the darkness for a long time. The house creaked around her. Their house, the place where they'd hosted dinner parties, celebrated holidays, made love, fought and made up, the place where she'd imagined they'd grow old together. Now it was just another asset to be divided, another strategic consideration in David's carefully planned betrayal. She thought about their anniversary dinner just 3 weeks ago. David had taken her to their favorite restaurant, the same place where he'd proposed. He'd held her hand across the table, told her how grateful he was for their life together, how lucky he felt to have found his person. Had it all been an act, a performance designed to throw her off the scent while he finalized his exit strategy? Emily pulled her knees to her chest and allowed herself 5 minutes to cry. For the marriage she thought she had, for the future she'd imagined, for the trust that lay shattered like glass around her feet. But as the tears subsided, something else began to grow in their place. Not just hurt, not just betrayal, but a cold, focused anger. David thought he was so clever, so strategic. He thought he could blindside her, leave her with nothing, and ride off into the sunset with his carefully preserved assets. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Emily opened her laptop again and began to dig deeper into David's email folders. If he wanted to play strategic games, she'd learn the rules. But first, she needed to understand exactly what she was up against. As she scrolled through months of correspondence with Marcus Chen, a clearer picture emerged. David had been planning this for almost 8 months. Every loving gesture, every romantic dinner, every I love you during that time had been a lie designed to keep her unsuspecting while he prepared to destroy their life together. But as Emily read through the legal strategies and financial analysis, she began to notice something David and his attorney had overlooked, something that might change everything. The house, their beautiful home that David was so eager to claim as marital property, had been purchased with money from Emily's inheritance. Her grandmother's estate, settled just before their marriage, had provided the down payment. And according to Colorado law, inherited property used for marital home purchase could be considered separate property under certain circumstances. Emily's grandmother had been a sharp woman, a former teacher who'd saved every penny and invested wisely. She'd left Emily not just money, but also a lesson about the importance of protecting oneself. Always keep your own records, Mija, her grandmother had told her shortly before she passed. Men can be wonderful, but they can also surprise you. A smart woman prepares for both possibilities. Emily had kept those records. Every bank statement, every transfer, Every document related to the house purchase was organized in a file cabinet in their home office. David knew about the inheritance, of course. But in his arrogance, he'd apparently assumed it wouldn't matter after 15 years of marriage. He was wrong. As the rain continued to fall and the clock ticked toward midnight, Emily began to formulate her own strategy. If David wanted a war, she'd give him one. But unlike him, she wouldn't be fighting to destroy. She'd be fighting to survive, and she had no intention of losing. Emily barely slept that night. She lay in bed next to David, listening to his peaceful breathing, while her mind raced with plans and possibilities. When dawn broke over the Denver skyline, painting their bedroom in soft golden light, she felt as if she were seeing the world through new eyes. David's alarm went off at 6:30 a.m., same as always. He rolled over and kissed her forehead, a gesture that had once been sweet, but now felt like another calculated move in his deception. "Morning, beautiful," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Sleep well?" "Like a baby," Emily lied, watching his face for any sign of guilt or nervousness. She found none. David was a skilled attorney, and apparently an even more skilled liar. He moved through his morning routine with the same efficiency he brought to everything else. Shower, shave, coffee. Quick scan of the news on his phone. Emily made his breakfast, as she had for 15 years, scrambling eggs exactly the way he liked them, and buttering his toast to the perfect shade of golden brown. "You're quiet this morning," David observed, straightening his tie in the hallway. "Mirror." "Just tired," Emily said. "I stayed up late working on the Peterson account." Another lie between them, but this one felt different. This one was armor. After David left for the office, Emily sat at their kitchen table with a cup of coffee and her laptop, creating a plan. She had advantages David didn't know about, but she also had vulnerabilities she needed to address quickly. First, she needed her own attorney, someone David wouldn't know, someone outside his professional network. She opened a search engine and began researching divorce attorneys in Denver, looking specifically for someone with experience in complex property cases. After an hour of research, she found what she was looking for: Catherine Walsh, senior partner at Walsh & Associates, with 30 years of experience in family law and a reputation for protecting clients' assets in high-stakes divorces. Her office was in downtown Denver, far from David's law firm in the tech center. Emily called the office and was surprised when Catherine Walsh herself answered the phone. "This is Catherine Walsh. How can I help you?" "Ms. Walsh, my name is Emily Martinez. I need to speak with you about a divorce situation, but it's complicated." "They usually are, dear. Can you be here this afternoon? I have an opening at 2 p.m. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you." Emily spent the morning gathering documents. She pulled every piece of paperwork related to the house purchase from the file cabinet in their home office, including the inheritance documentation her grandmother's attorney had provided, bank statements, title documents, insurance papers, tax records. She created digital copies of everything and stored them in a secure cloud account that David didn't know about. As she worked, Emily's phone buzzed with a text from her sister Maria in Phoenix. "Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay with you and David?" Emily stared at the message for a long time. Maria had never liked David, had always said there was something too smooth about him. Emily had defended her husband for years, attributing Maria's skepticism to protective sisterly instincts. She typed back, "All good, just busy with work. Talk soon." Another lie, but Emily wasn't ready to involve her family yet, not until she understood her options. At 1:30 p.m., Emily drove downtown to Catherine Walsh's office. The building was older but well-maintained, with marble floors and brass fixtures that spoke of established success. Catherine's office was on the 15th floor with a view of the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Catherine Walsh was not what Emily had expected. She was probably in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She looked more like someone's favorite teacher than a hard-nosed attorney. "Please, sit down," Catherine said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from her desk. "Tell me what's happening." Emily told her everything: the discovered emails, David's strategy, the timeline, the house situation. Catherine listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "How long has your husband been planning this?" Catherine asked when Emily finished. "At least 8 months, based on the emails I found." Catherine nodded grimly. "And you said the house was purchased with inheritance money?" "The down payment was. We have a mortgage, but the initial $150,000 came from my grandmother's estate. I have all the documentation." "That's very important. In Colorado, inherited property can maintain its separate character even after marriage, depending on how it's been handled. The fact that you used inheritance money for the down payment and that you have documentation gives us significant leverage." Emily felt a spark of hope. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means your husband's attorney may have made a crucial error in their strategy. They're treating the house as pure marital property. But if we can establish that your inheritance funds were used for the purchase, we may be able to claim that you have a separate property interest in the home." Catherine pulled out a calculator and began running numbers. "If the house is worth $750,000 now, and you put down $150,000 from inheritance on a purchase price of what? $400,000. $425,000, Emily said. "So you contributed about 35% of the original purchase price through separate property. Even accounting for appreciation and mortgage payments made during the marriage, you'd likely have a strong claim to at least half the current value as separate property, possibly more." Emily's head spun with the implications. "You mean I might be able to keep the house?" "Possibly. But Emily, I need to ask you something important. Your husband doesn't know that you've discovered his plans, correct?" "Correct." "And the house title? How is it currently held?" Emily pulled out the documents she'd brought. "Joint tenancy with right of survivorship." Catherine examined the paperwork carefully. "Here's what I think we should do. First, we need to move quickly, but carefully. Your husband is planning to blindside you, which gives us a strategic advantage as long as he doesn't suspect you know." "What do you mean?" "We're going to file a motion to partition the property before he files for divorce. Given your separate property contribution, we can ask the court to recognize your enhanced interest in the home. If we time it right, we can potentially secure your position before he even knows what's happening." Emily felt her heart racing. "Is that legal?" "Absolutely. You have every right to protect your interests in property that you helped purchase with separate funds. The key is documentation and timing." Catherine opened her desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "I'm going to need you to sign a retainer agreement, and I'll need all the documentation you mentioned. How quickly can you get me bank records showing the inheritance transfer and all related house purchase documents?" "I have everything with me." "Excellent. Here's what we're going to do over the next week." For the next hour, Catherine outlined a comprehensive strategy. They would file a partition action, claiming Emily's separate property interest in the home. They would also prepare for David's inevitable divorce filing by gathering financial records and establishing Emily's income potential realistically, not the inflated numbers David's attorney was using. "One more thing," Catherine said as their meeting concluded. "Your husband is a lawyer, which means he'll fight hard and he'll fight smart. Are you prepared for this to get ugly?" Emily thought about the clinical way David's strategy had referred to her emotional attachment to their home, the way he'd planned to argue that she was underreporting her income, the months of lies he'd told while preparing to destroy their marriage. "He's already made it ugly," she said. "I'm just evening the playing field." Catherine smiled, the first genuine smile Emily had seen all day. "I think we're going to work well together." Emily left the office feeling something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not hope for her marriage. That was clearly over. But hope that she wouldn't be left with nothing when the dust settled. She drove home through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, seeing everything differently now. The coffee shop where she and David used to have Sunday brunch, the park where they'd walked their old dog, Max, before he passed away 2 years ago. The life they'd built together was ending. But maybe, just maybe, she could salvage something from the wreckage. That evening, David came home at his usual time, carrying flowers from the grocery store. "Thought you might like these," he said, presenting her with a bouquet of pink roses. "You seemed a little down this morning." Emily accepted the flowers with a smile that felt foreign on her face. "Thank you. They're beautiful." They had dinner, together, discussing their days like any normal married couple. David told her about a difficult client meeting. Another lie, Emily suspected. She told him about a new project. True, but she omitted her afternoon meeting with Catherine Walsh. As they cleaned up the dishes together, Emily watched her husband of 15 years and tried to reconcile this man, who was being so attentive and thoughtful, with the person who had spent months plotting to leave her with nothing. "I love you," David said as they finished in the kitchen, pulling her into a hug. Emily hugged him back, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. "I love you too," she said, because it was still true, even though she was beginning to understand that love wasn't always enough. Later that night, after David fell asleep, Emily lay awake making her own plans. Tomorrow, she would begin transferring assets, documenting everything, and building her case. She would be strategic, just like David, but with one crucial difference. She would be fighting for truth, not deception, for justice, not exploitation, for the life she'd helped build, not the one she was trying to steal. David had taught her something valuable over the past 8 months, even without knowing it. Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones you need to protect yourself from. Emily would make sure she was protected. 3 weeks later, Emily had transformed herself from unsuspecting wife to strategic opponent. Every morning she maintained the facade of normalcy, making David's coffee, asking about his day, playing the role of the loving spouse he expected her to be. But beneath the surface, she was methodically dismantling his advantage. Catherine Walsh had been true to her word. The partition action had been filed quietly, with Emily listed as the primary petitioner seeking to establish her separate property interest in the marital home. The documents were served to David at his office on a gray November morning, and Emily received the call from Catherine at 10:47 a.m. "It's done," Catherine said. "Your husband was served 20 minutes ago." Emily was at her home office, working on a logo design for a new client, when her phone rang. She let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again. And again. Finally, she answered. "Emily." David's voice was tight with controlled fury. "We need to talk. Now." "I'm working, David. Can it wait until tonight?" "No, it cannot wait. I'm coming home." The line went dead. Emily saved her work and closed her laptop, then sat back in her chair and took a deep breath. This was it. The moment when the masks would finally come off. David arrived home 35 minutes later, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the windows. Emily could hear his footsteps as he moved through the house, looking for her. "Emily!" His voice echoed from the kitchen. She walked downstairs slowly, deliberately. When she entered the kitchen, David was standing by the island, still in his expensive charcoal suit, holding a stack of legal papers. His face was flushed, his carefully styled hair disheveled. "What the hell is this?" He thrust the papers toward her. Emily glanced at them calmly. "It looks like a partition action." "You're a lawyer, David. I'm sure you can figure it out." "Don't play games with me. Why are you trying to partition our house?" "My house," Emily corrected. "Or at least the portion of it that I purchased with my inheritance money." David's eyes narrowed. "Your inheritance." Emily, we've been married for 15 years. That money became marital property the moment we used it to buy this house. Actually, that's not entirely accurate under Colorado law, but I'm sure your attorney explained the nuances of separate property characterization when you were planning your strategy. The words hung in the air between them. David's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, and finally, calculation. You've been reading my emails. It wasn't a question. Emily didn't bother denying it. I've been educating myself about my legal rights, something I should have done a long time ago. David set the papers down on the counter and leaned against it, studying her with the same intensity he brought to cross-examining witnesses. How long have you known? About your divorce strategy? 3 weeks? About the fact that our marriage has been a lie for the past 8 months? Same amount of time? Emily, no. She held up her hand. You don't get to explain this away. You don't get to manipulate me anymore. I read everything, David. Every email, every strategy session, every plan to leave me with nothing while you preserved your assets and moved on to whatever comes next. David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she'd once found endearing but now recognized as a tell, something he did when he was trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said. Finally. How was it supposed to happen? You file for divorce out of nowhere, claim half my house, minimize your support obligations, and I just accept it because I'm too emotional and attached to fight back. The marriage hasn't been working for a long time, Emily. You know that. I know that you've been distant and secretive for months, but I thought we could work through it. I thought we were going through a rough patch, not that you were strategically planning my destruction. David straightened up, and she could see him shifting into attorney mode, the cold, analytical persona he wore in court. This partition action isn't going to work, he said. Community property laws are clear. The house is a marital asset. We'll see about that. My attorney seems to think I have a strong case. Your attorney? David's voice sharpened. Who did you hire? Emily smiled for the first time since he'd walked in. Someone you don't know. Someone outside your professional network. Someone who specializes in protecting clients from exactly the kind of strategy you've been planning. She watched as David processed this information, saw the moment when he realized she wasn't the easy target he'd assumed her to be. Emily, listen to me. We can work this out between ourselves. We don't need to involve lawyers and courts, and the way you were planning to work it out, with your secret strategy and your timeline designed to maximize your advantage? Emily shook her head. I don't think so. David's composure finally cracked. You have no idea what you're doing. You're going to destroy both of us financially. Do you know how much divorce litigation costs? How long it takes? How ugly it gets? You should have thought about that before you decided to treat our marriage like a hostile takeover. Emily turned to leave the kitchen, but David caught her arm. Please. Can we just sit down and talk about this like adults? We loved each other once. We can find a way to end this with dignity. For a moment, Emily felt the pull of 15 years of shared history. The man standing in front of her was still the person she'd fallen in love with in graduate school. Still the one who'd held her hand during her grandmother's funeral. Still the one who'd danced with her in the kitchen, while dinner cooked. But he was also the person who'd spent 8 months lying to her face while planning to take everything she cared about. Dignity. Emily pulled her arm free. David, you referred to me as the subject in your legal documents. You calculated my earning potential like I was a business asset. You planned to argue that I was hiding income while you hid your entire strategy. Where was the dignity in any of that? David looked away, and for the first time, Emily saw something that might have been shame in his expression. I want you to move out, she said quietly. This is my house too. Actually, it's not. Not according to the partition action. And even if it were, I don't want to live with someone who's been planning to betray me for 8 months. Emily, move out, David. Tonight. We can figure out the rest through our attorneys. She walked toward the stairs, then turned back. And David? Next time you want to strategically plan someone's destruction, you might want to remember to change your email passwords. Emily went upstairs and closed the bedroom door, then sat on the edge of the bed they'd shared for 15 years and listened to David moving around downstairs. She heard the front door slam twice as he carried his belongings to his car. She heard him in the kitchen, probably looking for something to eat or drink. She heard him pacing in the living room, talking on his phone in the low, urgent tones he used for crisis management. At 8:30 p.m., there was a soft knock on the bedroom door. "Emily, I'm leaving now. I'll be staying at the Marriott downtown until we figure this out." She didn't respond. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I thought this would be easier for both of us if we handled it strategically instead of emotionally." Emily almost laughed. "Easier for whom?" "I'll call you tomorrow," David said. "We need to talk about this properly." She heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard the front door open and close one final time. Then she heard his car pull out of the driveway. The sound she'd been listening for every evening for 15 years, but this time in reverse. Emily went to the window and watched David's taillights disappear down Maple Street. Then she walked through the house, turning on lights in every room. Her house. The house her grandmother's money had helped buy. The house where she'd built a life that was apparently an illusion. She called Catherine Walsh's emergency number. "Emily, how did it go?" "He's moved out. He knows I know everything. What happens next?" "Now we prepare for war," Catherine said. "How are you holding up?" Emily looked around the living room, at the furniture they'd chosen together, the photos of their life together, the evidence of 15 years of shared dreams and compromises. "I'm scared," she admitted, "but I'm also angry. And I think angry might be more useful right now. In my experience, righteous anger is one of the most powerful motivators in family law." "Get some rest, Emily. Tomorrow we start building your case in earnest." After ending the call, Emily poured herself a glass of wine and sat in her favorite chair, looking out at the neighborhood she'd called home for over a decade. The house felt different without David in it. Quieter, but also somehow lighter. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Heard from Mom that you and David are having problems. Want to talk?" Emily started typing several different responses, then deleted them all. Finally, she wrote, "It's complicated. I'll call you tomorrow, but..." As she sat in the gathering darkness, Emily realized something had shifted inside her. For the first time in months, she felt like herself again. Not the person David expected her to be, not the cooperative wife who would accept whatever scraps he offered, but the woman her grandmother had raised her to be, strong, smart, and completely unwilling to be anyone's victim. David had taught her an important lesson. The people you trust most can hurt you the worst. But Emily was about to teach him something too. Underestimating your opponent is the first step toward losing, and Emily had no intention of losing anything else. 6 months later, Emily stood in the kitchen of her house, legally and completely, making coffee for one. The morning sun streamed through the windows, highlighting the small changes she'd made since David left. Fresh flowers on the counter, a new painting on the wall, a sense of peace that had been missing for longer than she cared to admit. Eddie Een. Divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago, and the outcome had exceeded even Catherine Walsh's optimistic projections. The court had not only recognized Emily's separate property interest in the house, but had awarded her 70% ownership based on her inheritance contribution and the improvements she'd made over the years. David had been forced to buy out her share of his retirement accounts and pay her a modest amount of spousal support, exactly the opposite of what his original strategy had intended. Emily's phone rang as she sipped her coffee. Maria's name appeared on the screen. "Morning, sis," Emily answered, settling into her favorite chair. "Morning, survivor. How are you feeling?" Good. Really good, actually. It was true. The past 6 months had been the most difficult of Emily's life, but they'd also been transformative. The divorce proceedings had been ugly, just as David had predicted. He'd fought her partition claim vigorously, had hired an expensive attorney to counter Catherine's moves, had even attempted to argue that Emily had somehow manipulated him into using her inheritance money for the house purchase. But Emily had been prepared. Every document, every bank record, every piece of evidence had been meticulously organized and presented. Her grandmother's attorney had provided a deposition confirming the inheritance details. Emily's own financial records proved that she'd contributed not just the down payment, but also the majority of the home improvement costs over the years. Most importantly, David's own emails had undermined his case. When Catherine had introduced the divorce strategy documents into evidence, showing David's calculated plan to minimize Emily's financial position, the judge's demeanor had shifted noticeably. Mr. Martinez, Judge Patricia Hernandez had said, during the final hearing, "The court finds it troubling that you would develop such a detailed strategy to disadvantage your spouse while maintaining the appearance of a loving marriage. This behavior calls into question your credibility regarding the characterization of marital assets." David's attorney had objected, but the damage was done. The judge had ruled decisively in Emily's favor, stating that David's deceptive conduct warranted a finding that Emily's separate property interests should be protected and enhanced. "Have you heard from him at all?" Maria asked, pulling Emily back to the present. "Not since the final papers were signed. His attorney handles all communication now." "Do you miss him?" Emily considered the question. Did she miss the man she'd thought she was married to? The one who made her laugh, who remembered her favorite flowers, who had once promised to love her until death did them part. "I miss who I thought he was," she said finally. "But I don't miss living with someone who was planning to betray me. I don't miss wondering why he was so distant, or why he was working late so often, or why everything felt so false. And the house? Do you want to stay there?" Emily looked around the living room, seeing it with fresh eyes. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every memory embedded in these walls. It was all tainted by David's deception. But it was also the first place that had ever been truly hers. "For now," she said. "Maybe not forever, but for now it feels like home again." After ending the call with Maria, Emily went to her home office and opened her laptop. Her graphic design business had flourished during the divorce proceedings, partly because she'd thrown herself into work as a distraction, but also because clients had begun to notice her improved creativity and focus. She was working on a rebranding project for a local nonprofit when her doorbell rang. Emily wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, her heart skipped with the old anxiety. Would it be David, trying to continue their battle? But when she opened the door, she found a delivery person holding a large bouquet of sunflowers. "Emily Martinez? That's me." She signed for the flowers and carried them inside, looking for a card. The small envelope contained a simple message. "Congratulations on your new beginning. Catherine." Emily smiled as she arranged the sunflowers in a vase. Catherine Walsh had become more than just her attorney during the divorce proceedings. She'd become a mentor and friend. A woman who understood what it meant to fight for what you deserved, who had taught Emily that kindness and strength weren't mutually exclusive. The flowers were perfect, bright and bold and completely unlike the delicate roses David used to bring her. They represented something new, something that belonged entirely to Emily. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Emily, it's David. I know we're not supposed to communicate directly, but I wanted to say something. I'm sorry for all of it. You deserved better." Emily stared at the message for a long time. Part of her wanted to respond, to engage in the conversation she'd been wanting to have for months, but a larger part of her recognized it for what it was. Too little, too late, and possibly another manipulation. She deleted the message without responding. That afternoon, Emily met Catherine for lunch at a restaurant in Cherry Creek. the same area where she and David had once shopped for furniture for their first apartment together. But this lunch was about celebrating an ending, not a beginning. "You look good," Catherine said as they were seated at a table by the window. "Rested. I feel good. Really good. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. But maybe this is just what winning feels like." Catherine smiled. "It is, and you should be proud of yourself, Emily. Not many people would have had the strength to fight back the way you did. I had a good teacher. You had good instincts. I just helped you use them." They ordered their meals and talked about everything, except the divorce, Emily's growing business, Catherine's upcoming vacation to Italy, the early signs of spring in Denver. It felt good to have a conversation that wasn't about legal strategy or emotional wounds. "What's next for you?" Catherine asked as they finished their salads. "I'm not sure," Emily admitted. "For so long, my life was defined by being David's wife, by the plans we made together. Now I get to figure out what Emily Martinez wants, independent of anyone else. That's both terrifying and exciting." "Exactly." Emily took a sip of her iced tea and looked out the window at the busy street. People were walking by in the afternoon sunshine, living their lives, pursuing their own dreams and facing their own challenges. For the first time in months, she felt like she was part of that flow again, not watching it from the outside. "Can I ask you something?" Emily said. "Of course." "When you were going through your own divorce, you mentioned you'd been married before. How did you know you were going to be okay?" Catherine set down her fork and considered the question. "I think it was the first morning I woke up and didn't immediately think about what he was doing or where he was. The first morning that was just mine, you know. When I realized I could make coffee exactly the way I liked it, or watch the news, channel I preferred, or stay in bed an extra 20 minutes without having to consider anyone else's schedule." Emily nodded. She'd had several mornings like that recently. "The hardest part," Catherine continued, "wasn't the legal battles or the financial stress. It was learning to trust my own judgment again. When someone lies to you for months, when they make you question your own perceptions, it takes time to believe in yourself again." "Yes," Emily said softly. "That's exactly it." "But you did it. You trusted your instincts when you found those emails. You acted decisively when you needed to protect yourself, and you fought for what was rightfully yours. That takes courage." After lunch, Emily drove home through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, but everything looked different now. The coffee shop where she and David used to have Sunday brunch was just a coffee shop. The park where they'd walked their dog was just a park. The places that had once been defined by their shared memories were becoming just places again, neutral spaces where she could create new experiences. When she pulled into her driveway, Emily noticed her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, working in her garden next door. They'd exchanged pleasantries for years, but had never really talked beyond discussing property lines and shared maintenance responsibilities. "Hi, Mrs. Chen," Emily called out as she got out of her car. "Your tulips are beautiful this year." The older woman looked up and smiled. "Thank you, dear. I planted them last fall. Sometimes you have to plan ahead for beauty, you know." Emily walked over to the fence that separated their properties. "I've been thinking about doing some gardening myself. Do you have any advice for a beginner?" Mrs. Chen's face lit up. "Oh, I'd love to help. Gardening is one of life's great pleasures. Are you thinking flowers or vegetables?" "Maybe both." "I have more time to devote to hobbies now." Mrs. Chen didn't ask why, didn't probe into Emily's personal life. She simply nodded and began sharing her wealth of gardening knowledge, talking about soil preparation and seasonal planting schedules with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found genuine joy in nurturing growing things. They talked for nearly an hour, and by the end of the conversation, Emily had a list of recommended plants and a promise from Mrs. Chen to help her plan a small garden in her backyard. "It's funny," Mrs. Chen said as they were finishing their conversation. "I've lived next door to you for 8 years, and this is the longest conversation we've ever had." "I know. I'm sorry about that." I think I was so focused on my own little world that I forgot there was a whole neighborhood around me. Well, Mrs. Chen said with a knowing smile, sometimes it takes a big change to help us see what was always there. That evening, Emily sat on her back porch with a glass of wine and her laptop, working on a new project while the sun set behind the mountains. She was designing a logo for a women's shelter, pro bono work that felt meaningful in a way her corporate clients never had. As she worked, Emily thought about the past year and how dramatically her life had changed. 12 months ago, she'd been a married woman planning her future around someone else's dreams. Now she was a single homeowner, a successful business owner, and for the first time in her adult life, completely independent. The fear she'd felt when she first discovered David's betrayal had been replaced by something else. Not just relief, but genuine excitement about the possibilities ahead of her. She could travel anywhere she wanted, redecorate her house however she pleased, pursue clients and projects that aligned with her values rather than just her financial needs. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her mother. "Mia, how are you doing?" "I'm good, Mom. Really good. I'm proud of you, you know, for how you handled everything. Your grandmother would be proud too." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. I keep thinking about what she used to say about keeping your own records, preparing for both possibilities. She was a wise woman. She survived some hard times, and she wanted to make sure you could too. I understand now why she was so insistent. About that, it saved me. You saved yourself, Emily. The documents helped, but you made the choice to fight for what was yours. After ending the call with her mother, Emily went back to her design work, but her mind kept drifting to her grandmother, the woman who'd raised her to be strong and independent, who'd saved every penny and invested wisely, who'd insisted on teaching Emily about financial responsibility even when it seemed unnecessary. Her grandmother had never said much about her own marriage. Emily's grandfather had died when Emily was very young, but now Emily wondered if there had been lessons embedded in those practical conversations about money and property and the importance of self-reliance. "A smart woman prepares for both possibilities," her grandmother had said. At the time, Emily had thought she was just being pessimistic. Now she understood it was wisdom born from experience. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Emily closed her laptop and went inside. She walked through her house, turning off lights and locking doors, performing the small rituals of evening that were now entirely her own. In the kitchen, she paused to look at Catherine's sunflowers still bright and cheerful in their vase. Tomorrow, she would start planning her garden with Mrs. Chen. This weekend, she would drive to the mountains for a hiking trip she'd been wanting to take. Next month, she would visit Maria in Phoenix, a trip she'd been postponing for years because David had never wanted to go. The future stretched ahead of her, unplanned and unscripted, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, that felt like a gift rather than a burden. Emily turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs, but not before taking one last look around the living room. The house was quiet now, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the tense silence that had characterized the final months of her marriage. As she got ready for bed, Emily caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. She looked different than she had a year ago, older perhaps, but also stronger. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, evidence of the stress and worry and sleepless nights. But there was also something else, a clarity in her gaze, a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. She thought about David, probably in his new apartment across town, maybe with someone new already, or maybe still alone with his regrets. She felt neither hatred nor longing for him now, just a kind of distant sadness for what they'd both lost when he chose deception over honesty. But as Emily turned off the lights and settled into bed, her bed, in her house, in her life, she realized that what she'd gained was far more valuable than what she'd lost. She'd gained herself back. And that, she thought as sleep began to claim her, was worth fighting for. In the months that followed, Emily would face new challenges and opportunities. She would grow her business, travel to places she'd only dreamed of, and eventually, when she was ready, she would learn to trust and love again. She would plant the garden with Mrs. Chen, host dinner parties for her friends, and create new memories in every room of her house. But the foundation for all of it had been laid during those difficult months when she'd learned to fight for herself, when she'd discovered that love without respect was just elaborate pretense, and when she'd realized that the strongest person you can rely on is yourself. David had thought he was so clever with his strategy, his timeline, his careful plans to leave her with nothing. But he'd underestimated the most important factor in his equation, Emily herself. And in the end, that had made all the difference.